Hmm? Ah! Oh.
You understand why I did it?
John said he was a deserter.
But do you understand why I had to kill him?
Our way is the old way?
The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
Is it Trees or the White Walkers?
The White Walkers have been gone for thousands of years.
So he was lying.
The madman sees what he sees.
Hey everybody, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Duncan.
And I'm Jason.
And this is Game of Microphones, episode 43.
And this is kind of a special episode because we're going into our coverage starting over with the pilot, which is super fun. And just to warn you guys, if you just started watching Game of Thrones and you're looking for podcasts and you found ours, you should not listen.
Because this one is full of spoilers.
Unless you don't care about spoilers, this is from the point of view of having seen all the way up through season 7. So if you want to hear what we thought without getting spoiled, the best we can do is we put out an episode covering seasons 1 and 2. So once you get through season 2, you could pick it up from there. But if you don't want to be spoiled, you shouldn't listen. Otherwise, if you've seen up through season 7 or you just don't care about spoilers, then this is going to be great.
Indeed. So we will start with our top 5 highlights of Game of Thrones season 1, episode 1, Winter is Coming.
I can't believe it's called that. It's such a lie. I guess it doesn't say how long, but
yeah. It's not a lie. Winter's here now.
Yeah, it's true. But it's just 6 years later.
Long summer and fall. Yeah, how crazy is that? The first episode is called Winter is Coming, and winter doesn't arrive until the season 5 finale.
I guess if you're like Sansa and you're 13 years old and you've never seen a winter, then 6 years later, I guess that's still half her life away, though. But anyway,
winter is coming. When? Just wait as long as you've been alive.
Yeah.
From now, and then it'll be here. All right. So what do you got for your number 5?
Well, I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about just the first time we see a lot of these characters because it's the pilot episode and this is our first time encountering them. First of all, it's called Winter is Coming, and I never would have thought that wouldn't be until the end of season 6. Even watching this pilot, I had a sense that it was just around the corner because Ned Stark kept saying it. Then in the title sequence, which is the first time we see that, and we see King's Landing, Winterfell with Stark sigils, of course, the Wall, and Pentos. Those are the locations that we see, which makes sense. And I remember just being really captivated by that right off the bat because it reminded me of like those maps from the Lord of the Rings of Middle Earth. But also they had this really cool animated pop-up book treatment and awesome music.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll talk about the intro later, but after that intro and then this, I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. This is great. I'm loving this already. First thing Jon Snow says, he's watching Bran struggle to try and do archery, pats him on the shoulder and says, go on, father's watching, and your mother. So that I thought that was interesting because right off the bat, his dialogue is a little hint. Father's watching, that sounds like our father, and then he goes, and your mother. So it's like
right off the bat,
his.
they're hinting that something's going on there.
Yeah,
and this is great too that this is your number 1 because my number 1 is immediately getting accurate reads on the characters. So this all fits in perfectly with mine too.
Yeah, well, here's Sansa and Arya. She's being praised for her fine embroidery needlework, Sansa, while Arya is struggling with it, and then next thing we know, she hits a target. So
Yep,
and
there
embarrasses
Arya's
Bran.
the warrior.
Yeah.
Sansa's the perfect little lady.
Uh-huh.
John's got bastard issues.
Yeah, this all carried forward for years. Then Ned, aside from encouraging Bran, that's the first thing we see him do, standing up with Catelyn. I should know that by now. On the second story, just looking down, this proud, father figure with her strong and in charge and everything. Joffrey, he comes in on his horse and he's kind of nodding and looking confident. And, later at the feast, he catches Sansa's eye. He smiles. At this point, we have no clue what an ass he is, I would say.
Right. Yeah. This is like the one character that we get zero accurate read on.
He just seems like he could be a great guy.
Yeah.
and it's not true.
Perfect gentleman of Westeros.
Right. Then we see Robert, and there's that tense moment between Robert and Ned when they first meet, but they're staring each other down, and I think that was just two dudes having fun with each other. Ned was not nervous at all. That was just for the audience's sake to go, what's going on here?
They're playing it up because the audience doesn't know of the relationship yet, that these two basically grew up together and were best friends.
Yeah,
and
they're practically brothers.
Won the crown together. Yeah, they are. Yeah, for all intents and purposes, brothers. So funny. And then it's all like all that tension is just wiped away immediately. You got fat. And Eddard looks him up and down and kind of laughs like, you got fat, bro.
Yeah, he was just asking for that, Robert.
That was great. Oh, yeah, definitely. It was like he knew what Ned's response was.
Yeah.
It was like making fun of himself by saying that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. Then I was like, kind of funny, the first thing we see Tyrion doing is getting his dick sucked.
Right.
by Roz.
Horror, man.
And then I love too that Jaime came in and gave him some crap, but then he brought more prostitutes.
And smiles.
What
so
a
there you
good
get
brother.
Right off the bat that Jaime likes Tyrion.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of sexist to say what a good brother, but it was kind of touching to see that they have this bond and this friendship right from the start. We see Dany looking out the window. I was thinking maybe across the sea to Westeros. I don't know.
Good point. I hadn't considered it.
And then creepy Viserys demeaning her and making her feel small and pretty much molesting her right off the bat. He's a fucking asshole.
Which also gives us a little hint at the Targaryen history of incest.
Yeah, right. But she didn't seem to like that history at all. Then Khal Drogo, I thought that was, I didn't expect that. I didn't remember, but we see him coming up into this like kind of elegant garden courtyard on his horse.
Right.
That's not quite the scene you're used to seeing the Dothrakis in. But it was great to see Jason Momoa again, and he's so still and quiet, but exuding this power and intensity.
Super intense without saying anything. I saw his audition reel the other day for Game of Thrones, and man, he's a maniac in that.
Oh yeah,
pretty crazy. Yeah,
did he try different ways of doing it, or was it pretty consistent?
It was totally consistent. It was basically the scene from later this season when he's after the attempt on Daenerys' life, and he's all pissed off and he's going around the fire like banging on his chest and screaming about riding their wooden horses across the ocean to take the Iron Throne, and he basically was doing that in the audition, and it was terrifying.
It seemed like she was kind of interested in him. She moved towards him right away, and she was scared, but she seemed interested. But then she said she didn't want to be his queen, so maybe she was conflicted, or maybe I was reading that wrong and she wasn't interested.
She was probably caught up in the emotion for a minute, and then her logical brain like kicked in later when thinking about it. Like, what? Wait a second,
Yeah, it seemed kind of like that. I had actually forgotten totally that Benjen was such a big part in the beginning. I didn't remember seeing him until we saw him with Bran in like season 6 or whatever it was, 5.
Yep, you learn he's a member of the Night's Watch right off the bat. That Jon is like a big fan of his, and it was interesting. There's a moment where he's meeting with Jon, and you're kind of getting a feel for their relationship. And Jon tells Benjen he wants to join the Night's Watch, right?
Yeah, and he's trying to talk him out of it. You might not...
Right, he's like, none of us will father children, and Jon's like, I don't care about that. And he's like, you might if you knew what it meant. And now that we know what it means, because Jon is actually a Targaryen heir to the throne, that would be passing on along a royal important bloodline. I think Benjen knew, man. Benjen fucking knew.
See, now what I thought he was saying is you might, if you knew what it meant, that meant you might care about going up there if you knew how shitty the conditions are and how, you know, how there's all these scumbags up there and stuff.
Oh, maybe that was part of it, but that specific line, I think he was referring right to none of us will father children, and John saying, I don't care about that. Like,
could be.
Specifically.
I was glad to see that
definitely.
it was the same actor, because a lot of times when characters have a brief part and then they show up later in this show, they get a more seasoned actor to play the role when the role gets bigger. But I mean, this guy's great, so.
Yeah, I thought he was awesome too. He does look a little different in later seasons with all the facial prosthetics that they put on.
He looks a lot happier and easygoing and carefree here. And the last thing I noticed, just that Cersei said it was her first time in the North. I thought that was interesting, and I don't think she's been back up there since. So first and only time.
Yeah, definitely not. And she does not want to go up there still.
No,
currently.
Yeah, she's like, you're so pretty. We shouldn't hide you away up here, like little digs and things like that.
Right.
About the North.
So funny.
That's it.
Okay. So continuing on that thread of meeting the characters for the first time and getting a read on them, right off the bat, the first time we see Jaime, he says that as your brother to Cersei, so they establish immediately that they were brother and sister, and she goes on to tell a story about him jumping off of the 100-foot rocks at Casterly Hill, and so it establishes him as being brave but reckless. There's just a lot of those things. Dany gets in the hot bath immediately and is warned by her handmaiden. Oh, it's too hot, my princess, and that's foreshadowing her like total immunity to heat, apparently.
Yeah, and right before that, Viserys says you're slouching, and it's true, and that's kind of interesting because she's so demeaned by him all the time and disrespected and just held down, held back, and she seems so meek. You can see little bits of her assertions coming out, but it's very stunted, and it's because of him, and she hasn't really realized her true powers. But when she went, I remember now, I hadn't remembered until I rewatched it, but when she got in that hot bath and the woman says it's too hot, I thought, oh, this feels to me like, someone who cuts themselves just to feel something, or someone who's just so numb because of shit that they've been through that she didn't even care anymore. Fuck it. But now, watching it a second time, it's like, oh, this is showing that she's actually got some power, some specialness to her.
Right. Yeah, it's so cool, man. And you're totally right about that, like the idea of cutting yourself or doing something just so you can feel. That's a great read on that scene as well.
It could be both, but it's definitely on second viewing, it's like, oh yeah, this is showing that she's impervious to heat.
Right. And how it fits in with that prior psychology we were just talking about helps even mask that clue a little better. Which makes it even more clever,
Right. Yeah.
I like how it shows that this episode shows that Jon was very supportive and patient with his siblings. Right off the bat, like you're saying, he says, "Go on, father's watching," and your mother encouraging Bran. When they go to watch the beheading of the Night's Watch deserter, he's kind of tutoring Bran. He's got the older brother role. I feel like it should be Robb saying these things to him, But it's Jon Snow, the natural leader.
When I first watched this, I thought these kids are kind of like, they're going to grow into themselves, but they're pale imitations of Ned, the hero, who's just amazing man. And that's kind of how I thought back then. But now in hindsight, Jon's just become this total hero, even outshining Ned. And so now looking back, I'm noticing all these things about him. He's the one who seems the coolest of the brothers, Even
Absolutely.
Robb seems a little uppity sometimes or kind of arrogant, and especially when Jon's the one who stood up for the direwolf pups when everybody else was ready to kill them. It's like, you're the most noble, you're the most helpful, the most humble,
most empathetic.
Yeah. So he was showing all those traits, and watching this episode, every time I saw him, I couldn't help but thinking, like, yep, there's old Aegon Targaryen.
Yeah. Oh man, that's crazy. I didn't even think of that once this whole time, this whole episode.
First time I saw him, I'm like, there's Aegon.
Yeah, that was a great scene with the direwolves. You know, the direwolf is your house sigil. You've got 5 kids. There's 5 wolf pups. Like they each deserve one. And then
there's a sixth one
protecting the little guys.
Runt.
It's so cool. You can hear it like sort of whimper on the show, right? And that sort of like that's how they start walking away, and John hears it and then picks it up, right? Did you notice that? You can hear him?
Yeah, I noticed. I don't know if I heard the whimper, but I noticed that he was the one who heard it or who noticed it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it whimpers, and that's interesting because Ghost never makes a sound, right? So this is the one book thing I'm going to mention here, and it'll entice people to read the books because it's pretty interesting. In the books, John hears Ghost, right, and goes to Ghost, and then everybody else that's there is like, "What you heard? What are you hearing? There's nothing going on." So it kind of hints that John and Ghost have like a mental thing going on already.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, because Ghost never makes a sound. He's repeatedly referred to as.
I didn't hear it this time, and you did. So I think you and Ghost.
Yeah, Ghost. Yeah, it's funny. Like you can tell they set up the tension immediately between John and Catelyn. Also, first off with him commenting that your mother, which just creates a feeling of distance between the two of them. And then that's further exaggerated when, at the end of the scene, Ned gets called away to go for the beheading, and Catelyn stands behind, and she's just looking down at John from that balcony, and they sort of have a moment where they look up at each other, and it's really tense. And
and he's kind of got this glowering, I'm sorry, or...
Right, I'm sorry, I'm a bastard.
She's like, fuck you, dude.
Yeah. So there's more of that. He's all pissed that he's not being able to go into the banquet because he's a bastard and it would be unseemly, which is really Ned's way of protecting him, keeping him far away from the king, so that he would never notice a resemblance with Lyanna or figure out that it's really a Targaryen, it's so tragic, but like. You know what I mean? Like he's doing everything he can to protect him, but it's not having a good effect on John at the same time.
Yeah, and he's getting a lot of shit from like Theon and his brothers too. And I kind of like that. They're being really playful with him, like older brothers are. Sometimes they're like, "You get the runt" and everything, but it still feels like they love him. But still, he's got to take a lot of shit,
And what is it when they're getting their hair cut?
Yeah,
and Rob
and he hates that, man. They got a point, man. He's a little precious about that hair.
Hear him well. He's never met a woman or a girl he likes better than his own hair.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, he looks like Nico when I take him to get his hair cut.
Yep. And then further, highlighting his bastard-related stress, he interacts with Tyrion for the first time, who says, "You're Eddard Stark's bastard, aren't you?" He's all offended and says, "Let me give you a bit of advice. You never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you." He says, "What the hell do you know about being a bastard? And all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes." He responds. That's cool because that
classic,
and significant recently. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that scene especially is. I didn't realize it was in the pilot, but it was a little bit of a bond formed between those two, so that when they met up, I mean, they also go to the wall, but and have more bonding experiences. But this was the beginning of it, and so when they met up later in season 7, they had that experience together where they kind of got to like each other.
And you can tell, like right off the bat, the way that John likes, he pauses. It makes him stop and think about that, and he starts seeing Tyrion in a light similar to himself.
Yeah.
And you can tell that he cares about, as to quote the later episode, cripples, bastards, and broken things, just like Tyrion does. He's saving the little wolf pups. He's starting to feel for Tyrion there. Like
it shows that Tyrion has a sensitivity and an empathy too.
Right, absolutely. That he can relate to this bastard who he would have no business talking to, but he's showing him care and giving him advice to wear his bastardy, his armor. he's trying to elevate him as well. Kind of shows where Tyrion is as well. Yeah, good point. So the whole episode is just, you get an immediate read on everybody that really well. Except for Joffrey, basically.
Yeah, which
So
is
there's
cool
my,
because right now we just want to see, that Sansa has stars in her eyes and she might be a queen someday. And even though there's already a lot of cruelty in this episode, which I'll talk about, we don't realize yet how fucking cruel this series is going to be. And so they don't want to spell it out all at once. But I can't wait to... I don't even remember. I think it's the very next episode we find out what a dick Joffrey is, but I'm looking forward to that.
On the King's Road. Yeah, it might be. If the next episode is the King's Road, then yeah. So that pretty much wraps up my number 5. What about your number 4, brother?
So number 4 is similar to yours. It's just looking at how the future of the series and the characters are hinted at, and also things seen in a new light. And sometimes I think that we see glimpses of their future, but their futures are realized in ways that are actually a tragic or twisted version of what they thought, or even the opposite sometimes. But it's related. It's always related. For example, Arya, she's a fighter, and that's clear in this episode, but she becomes this death assassin, like an extreme version, almost to the point of maybe being to her detriment. I mean, she's very useful, obviously, but it seems like her soul is a little corrupted, maybe.
Yeah, it's sad, really.
Theon. I mean, I loved seeing good old early Theon, who says things like, he said, talking about Robert Baratheon, think of all the southern girls he gets to stab with his right royal prick. Just got a smart mouth, and he's comes off as arrogant and not total asshole, but he seems like he might actually be kind of a fun guy, but he's just kind of prickish and
cocky, but capable as well.
Yeah. And then he makes later big, bold mistakes, and like that behavior, especially when he tried to take over Winterfell, just came back to bite him in the ass majorly. And then with Ramsay, just gets all of that, the brashness, any constant references to sex, which we'll see later in the series, just gets that all stripped and cut away, and he gets cut down to just nothing, basically.
You could almost say that Theon was dead, right?
Yeah. All of that gets killed.
Which brings me to the whole Ironborn thing. What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger.
Wow,
do we see a resurgence
awesome.
of Theon in
the
next season?
I hope so.
After that, after he sort of stepped up at the end of this one,
I mean,
we could see him come back hard.
Yeah, and I like him, and especially I felt for him so much during that like whole season of torture. And he's done some shockingly horrible things, but if you're going to watch this series,
horrible things,
you have to kind of. I mean, you don't have to, but you tend to want to forgive people like Jamie. We saw him do a shitty thing in this episode
as well.
Yeah, and now we come back to kind of forgiving them a bit. So Sansa, she's into her I'll say womanly traditions, like embroidery, having her hair done, dreaming of being a queen, eyeing Joffrey, and she ends up just getting I think just a pivotal moment for her is the whole thing with Ramsay, and she ends up marrying a lord and then just getting brutalized by him, and then rising above that and becoming a strong, intelligent leader. She's kind of superficial in this episode, but now she's not at all. She's totally
I hope it stays
sensible
that way.
And yeah. Me too.
Yeah, she's sort of spoiled and bratty and entitled.
I think she's not like a bad person or anything, but
no.
But
not. I wouldn't stretch it that far.
Yeah.
But a little bratty.
Yeah.
Like she says right off the bat after they talk about after Ned and Robert talk about joining their houses potentially, Sansa's talking with Catelyn, and she's like, it's all I've ever wanted to be queen. It's like, oh, it's such a small thing to want.
Yeah, I know. And I'm like, I bet you, I'm surprised Caitlyn didn't go, you're asking for stuff all the time. Don't say that.
Yeah, right. I just like face palm at that moment. Like, oh, that's all you've ever wanted? Just that?
Please, Mom.
Just to be a queen of everything. And then have everything I ever want.
Yeah. Bran, I talked about this in a recent episode, but he he's a climber and an explorer, and then he gets his legs taken away, and then he becomes this kind of psychic explorer on a whole new level. So
yeah, whole nother level of
extreme.
exploring. Wow.
John, he's noble and he's humble, and he wants to go north to the wall and kind of get out of the way of everything. I mean, that's not why, but that would be the. I mean, I kind of did wonder if that was why. He's like, I'm sick of just being considered the bastard. I want to get out of here and do something, have a purpose. But then he falls into this leadership position, and he's in the middle of everything. And you can see his leadership qualities, but also the humility. So that's just played out throughout the series, where he's not going to come in and announce himself as king, but he's going to be a damn good king.
Yeah, I freaking love Jon Snow, man. He's awesome.
Me too. And I really did. Great. I remember thinking, he seems kind of dour, and like everybody was making fun of him, and I think that affected me when I watched this, going, yeah, he's a little bit of a loser. But watching it now, after having seen everything that's happened, I totally perceive it differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ned. Now, Ned, in this episode, he's just to the point of chopping off this guy's head, even though you can tell it weighs heavily on him. And then he gets his own head chopped off. And so there's an echo there.
Talk about foreshadowing.
And both of those are, not all the right information is out. Like with this guy, it's clear Ned doesn't believe him. And it makes me wonder, if Ned did believe him, would he have handled that situation differently? And maybe the guy would have survived. And then, of course, when Ned gets his head chopped off, it's all fucked up. Like, not at all for the right. There's no reason for that to have happened.
I think that Ned probably would have killed him, the deserter, anyway. Even if he believed him, he probably would have said, you should have taken it to your command.
Yeah, maybe.
Should have followed the chain of command.
And I was thinking, okay, that guy Will, he's the one who deserted. I think he probably did the right thing, because he thought, if I go back there, I know these guys are not going to believe me, and then I'm going to be stuck, and I want to go tell my family so I can help them. And it turns out that his family had plenty of time to pack up and get out, like 6 or 7 years, but still.
But they didn't have any advanced warning, any notice.
Yeah.
We never have it confirmed that Ned passed the message along.
Right. He didn't believe it. I think to his dying day, he still didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Now, I already talked about Dany a little bit, but just seeing how fucked up Viserys treats her, I would let all 40,000 of them fuck you, and their horses too, if that's what it took. It's just so good knowing what she became. To watch that and go, oh dude, you're fucked, and she's gonna be a total badass, so fuck you, is much better than seeing it the first time going, oh my god, this poor girl.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Knowing what's happening, it's much easier to take it in. And I liked the little hint that we get of Viserys's fate when they're during the wedding there, and he's becoming impatient and says, like, when am I going to meet with the Khal? Blah 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 blah. And Illyrio Mopatis tells him, Khal Drogo promised you a crown. You shall have it.
That's right. Exactly.
A golden crown that men will tremble to behold.
And Dany gets the dragon eggs from Illyrio, and there's this weighty music, and she seems like something's going on. She's stirred. It's like more than just getting some little table decorations. There's something important about this.
Yeah, something really, really important about it.
It's her babies.
I liked the quote there as well. I'm trying to find it. What does he say? I wrote it down.
He said they're stone.
From the Shadowlands beyond Asshai, the ages have turned them to stone, but they will always be beautiful. Which I just thought was really cool description of them. So you know that they're petrified, and right off the bat, you're under the impression like they're useless. They're dead.
Yeah. But there's obviously something going on there. And then I was like, oh, one of those is going to be a nice little zombie someday. That's so sad. Let's see. I mean, the relationship between Arya and Sansa, the only exchange that I noticed was Arya keep making comments about the royal party. Where's the imp? Or that's Jaime Lannister. And Sansa going, shut up.
Right. Yeah. She tells her to shut up. That was another time you get to you're you're fed the information that Jaime and Cersei are brother and sister. That's Jaime Lannister, the Queen's twin brother. She says. So they're like, I read something about the original pilot recently. In case anybody doesn't know, this was the second pilot that they filmed for this TV show. The first one was too campy, I guess, and the characters were not very well established. Like people were unaware at the end that Jaime and Cersei were brother and sister when they were having sex, so it wasn't as potent. So they ended up recasting a lot of people and rewriting it entirely and filming it again largely. Interestingly, George R.R. Martin himself had a cameo in the original pilot, being somebody visiting the manse at Illyrio Mopatis's place, and he might have been present for the wedding or something like that. But that didn't make the final cut. Unfortunately, that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, there was a lot of feeding of information. Like the first time Jaime saw Cersei, he said, "As your brother, I blah blah blah."
Yeah, exactly.
And like Ned to Robert, remember back when we were 16 and blah blah, just to like tell that they were together, that they were friends and everything.
A lot and it could be considered clunky dialogue in some circumstances, but in this case, I think that it's all like extremely necessary.
Yeah, it is. It's hard as a storyteller to figure out how to impart that kind of information. But I know that when I first watched this, I did not notice that. Only watching it now.
Neither did I.
In hindsight, do I notice it? Yeah.
And even in hindsight, I'm like, wow, it's good that they said that.
Yeah. But it does make me feel a little better about like getting late into the show and going, is the quality down? And I'm like, no, I thought maybe going back, I would think the dialogue used to be so much better. I mean, it's still great, but it's just as good now as it was then.
Yeah. I don't think it's gotten any worse at all.
I don't think so.
Except for the bad pussy line.
What was that? Which one was that?
Remember, you want a good girl, but you need the bad pussy. With Bronn and one of the Sand Snakes, season 5. He blocked it out because that was like the worst line of the entire show. You must have blocked it out.
I don't know. I think it's fine, but whatever. And then looking at Lyanna's tomb is like, oh, we know so much more about what this means and everything now.
I know, it's so cool.
Yeah, I won't go into the story. You guys all know it, but
yeah,
there's old Aegon's mother right there.
And there's kind of just, without telling the story, they're stressing the importance of it by showing how upset Robert is about it. Still, like after all this time, it was obviously something really important involving this character.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
And we know it's Ned's sister. But Robert says, in my dreams, I kill him every night. And did Robert know that Lyanna was actually in love with Rhaegar? We don't know that, do we?
We don't know for a fact. It's kind of interesting the way that it all played out, that I think people may have been afraid to tell him, or that he just couldn't accept that Lyanna would abandon their betrothal like that. Like I don't know if it was a psychological barrier or a literal information barrier that prevented him from realizing what was going on.
And then right off the bat, just talking about little hints of the future, this series pulled the rug out from under me and kind of broke my heart, because I loved watching Bran jump around and climb on the buildings, and they played that.
Yeah, that's my number 3.
Cool music. And then he gets pushed out a high window and, as far as I knew, killed. And I'm like, oh, fuck, man. I'm like, I better not get attached to anyone in this series. I know that now. And I still take that to heart. And that's kind of why I'm able to deal with things like the recent death of Viserion the dragon and so many others, just because of this Bran thing. And then later Ned, I'm like, nope, you can't get attached. That's what Game of Thrones is.
Yeah, they kind of give you the warning shot across your bow with
first
Bran
episode
taking the plunge here. Oh man. One other thing about the information, whether or not Lyanna was kidnapped or had run away and eloped. She was 16 at the time, so even if it was her decision, her father may have considered it unwilling because she was, only 16 years old. So
like statutory kind of thing.
Yeah, it could have been considered to be a kidnapping either way.
Last, when we saw those like little charms or whatever laid on the eyes of John Aaron.
Yeah.
I remember like, oh yeah,
so
that's
cool.
what they did with Joffrey in the same spot.
And Tywin.
Oh, maybe that's who I'm thinking of. Maybe it was Tywin and not Joffrey, or maybe it was both. I don't know. But that was interesting. And then, same thing. We know so much more about Jon Arryn now that he was Catelyn's sister's husband. And there's they allude to that a little bit here, but you don't really get it. And that Jon
and that's
Arryn,
my number 4, so we can just jump right into that right now.
Yeah.
Continue.
Well, he protected Ned and his brother from the Mad King, and that Lysa did what? She killed him, poisoned him, because Littlefinger, who we don't even see in this episode, told her to, and then sent a note to Catelyn accusing the Lannisters just to get Ned going and getting himself in trouble. Now, why did Littlefinger do that exactly?
Why did he do what?
Why did he have Lysa poison Jon Arryn and kill him, and then have her send a note to Catelyn accusing the Lannisters? Because he wanted to get Ned killed so he could have Catelyn?
I think he's just constantly sowing discontent among various groups of people, whether it's siblings or houses. He just planted.
You don't think he had some
chaos.
Specific end in mind?
I really don't think it was anything specific. Like, there's no way he could have.
Just that whole chaos is a ladder thing. Let's make some chaos.
Yeah. Just sowing seeds of chaos where he can, and seeing what sprouts, and climbing the stalks.
Got it.
I think, because I don't think there's any way he could have particularly foreseen. Maybe he foresaw Ned being named Hand, but he couldn't have seen the whole Bran thing or any of that. Like,
yeah,
we now know it was his dagger, but he couldn't have known that was going to happen.
That was his undoing too. Come to think of it,
right? Yeah,
because Bran's the one who knew everything about him in the end there.
Right, so he saw that he turned the Starks and again the Lannisters against each other. Then he saw one of the sprouts from his sowing of seeds of discontent, which was Bran's attempted murder, and he harnessed that by sending someone in to finish the job, just to solidify that tension.
Right, which caused Bran to lose his legs, and then he ended up becoming the Three-Eyed Raven and laid bare all of the things that Littlefinger did.
Yeah,
only to get him executed.
And I love that the story device of seeing all these things take flight, like come into motion before we're even introduced to the character of Littlefinger. So we're not likely to make the connection that one is related to the other, which is really cool. And
man, this would have been such a different podcast if we had tried to do it without giving any spoilers, because that's pretty much all we're doing. But I love it.
Yeah, it's great to just think about it in context.
Yeah.
Be able to marvel at the significance of seemingly tiny little things.
Yeah, this is the perfect show to do that.
Yeah, like all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. Who would ever think that would come up again and be something that...
Or to think, too, that he's actually not a bastard, and so that advice doesn't totally apply.
Oh, my God. Yeah,
but I'm done. Oh, you did... Oh, so that your number 4 was about Lysa.
Jon Arryn's death and the significance of that. So, yeah, we immediately are seeing... The first time we go to King's Landing is in the Sept of Baelor, and we're seeing Jon Arryn lying there dead with the stones over his eyes, and that meant nothing to us at the time watching this originally. Like zero. We have no idea who this guy is, what significance his character is, why it matters.
I didn't even remember that we ever saw him physically.
Exactly. It was completely like useless at that point. Like it would just, you'd push that information out of your head to remember the important stuff,
But if you go to the Game of Thrones Wikia and look up Jon Arryn, you'll see his corpse with because that's
only time we ever saw him, which is great. I almost included that in my pictures too when I was writing about how we're doing the rewatch. But yeah, there's that. Then we get the Rider and the Knight from Lysa, from the Vale and the Eyrie, explaining that the Lannisters had poisoned him, and Catelyn is like, well, if she can't be lying about this, because if this letter ended up in the wrong hands, if this rider was intercepted, her head would be on a spike,
right? And the truth is that, well, Littlefinger doesn't care about that.
Right. The truth is, Littlefinger does not give a shit about Lysa, as we see in the Moondor episode, season 4, episode 8, I think, or 6, one of those. But yeah, it's just cool seeing all this stuff happening, seeing Jon Arryn dead, seeing the Rider and the Knight, and hearing of the Lannisters poisoning him. When we found out in the last episode to air season 7 finale that Littlefinger did all this stuff, like that it's exposed that he was the one that responsible for this guy's death, that he made Lysa write that letter,
Yeah.
And it's all just a manipulation, and we don't even know this character exists yet, so there's no way we're going to make the connection, when we first meet him or anything like that.
It was good that we found out when we did. Because why didn't they wait till season 4, right? Something like that. So that at that point, it was such a huge revelation. Oh my God, what? Oh, dude,
Great.
Littlefinger fucking did this. And it took enough time that you were so invested in the series by then. But then it took another 3 seasons before that all finally came to light. So that was a perfect amount of time to go, when is he going to get found out? And keep thinking that. And then when he did, it was so satisfying.
It's just so cool, the whole structure of how they arranged for all this. It's just phenomenal storytelling, in my opinion.
Me too.
It's just so good, man. It's really cool to watch it again. And when the death of Jon Arryn leads to Ned heading south, and we have Catelyn who's discouraging him from going, and then Maester Luwin who's saying, well, if it is the Lannisters that are responsible for Jon Arryn's death, who else would be able to protect Robert than you? Like, you're the only one who he can trust at this point. He's surrounded down there by Lannisters and whatnot. And Catelyn replies and says to Ned, which is like such a poignant moment for me, like really hits me. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Was your father and brother rode south on a king's demand. And we don't know what that means at this point, watching it for the first time. But Luwin responds, a different time, a different king. So something happened. Right.
And there's so many, a lot of the story, the history, I had to go and read the wiki to really flesh it out, because since I haven't read the books. So, it's interesting to see how they drop little hints of all these things, but you don't really understand what he's talking about. I think the main point of that is there's been a history of dangerous and tragic stuff that's happened.
When people ride south.
Yeah, that's it. But now we know the story behind it.
And it was really ominous at the time, too. I remember seeing it for the first time, I was like, whoa, like this is serious. Something serious went down.
Had you not read the books?
No, I started watching the TV show during season 4 when it had started airing, and I marathoned it all the way up until season 4, episode 8, which is the first episode that I ended up watching live on HBO, and that was The Mountain and the Viper. And it's the first one I ended up watching live. I was watching it with my family, my parents and my sister, I think. And at the end, when the Viper's head gets crushed, the screen turns black, and we all just sat there in silence for like 3 minutes.
Who didn't? It's like, oh shit. Me and Jenny too. We're just sitting there going, fuck.
Yeah, it was the craziest episode to watch live for the first time.
Right.
Something so intense.
It's like, if you ever, listeners, trust me on this, if you ever want to get someone into Walking Dead, just have them watch season 7, episode 1. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
so much dead air, but beautifully done. In context, it's amazing.
Yes, but I always feel like Walking Dead, it just ramps up on the brutality as it goes. So, but we're a bit desensitized to it. That if you ever jumped in later in that series, you just think whoever watches the show is a monster. That you really have to start at the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know how much it's been really described what happened to Brandon and Rickard Stark on the TV show, but Sansa did mention this last season that the Mad King Aerys murdered their grandfather, who was Rickard. So it's at least been mentioned. I don't know to what extent. I can't remember how much people know, but yeah, it was brutal. We know that Brandon and Ned and Brandon and Rickard rode south and were killed. They never came back. We know that much for sure.
And murdered by the king.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be watching for little tidbits, because I'm not the kind of person who can pick up on these little tidbits as the series goes along. I had to go and look into all of it, but now that I kind of know the story, it'll be interesting to rewatch and see what they doled out.
Definitely. So that pretty much covers my number 4, the death of Jon Arryn, just its whole significance, and now we know like what happened with Littlefinger, so everything, seeing it happen now, rewatching, just is more significant and means more and we can see how it fits into the context of everything and why it's so important. Like all this stuff is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to your number 3. What you got?
Okay, I'm just going to talk about stuff having to do with whites and White Walkers. So I remember when I got into this, I was excited, but I also thought, well, it's a fantasy story. And I think this is one reason why a lot of people don't even watch or care about Game of Thrones. They're like, I don't really care about fantasy. I mean, I always did like fantasy, but I just think of it as more like a Lord of the Rings. And watching this, the intro with
fantasy.
the snow, and then I see zombies, and I'm like, zombies, awesome.
Yes, and for you, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's the same thing that happened with me. I thought I wasn't as focused on like the like magical fantasy elements of it, but I was under the impression that it was all about like political intrigue and stuff like that. So I wasn't really excited to watch it either. I had had no interest in it really. And finally, so many people had said that it was good that I ended up watching the pilot. And this first scene with the whites and everything, and within 30 seconds, I was just helplessly hooked and addicted. I just remember thinking within 30 seconds, seeing this gate and the ice tunnel and the front of the wall, and just the colors and the cinematography and everything, it just looked like money, looked like straight money, just stacks of gold. I was just like, wow, this is gorgeous.
Well,
I knew I was going to love it.
Even the political intrigue, like if somebody described to me, if they just said this is a fantasy with lots of political intrigue, then I would be dubious, and I'm not sure.
Right.
It sounds
Yeah.
a little bloodless and a little dry. But when you get into Game of Thrones, it's full of life, and it's edgy and dark, and
Right.
it's funny, and it's just so like full of life. Like I said, it's.
Right, like I was imagining it more of like Downton Abbey vibe.
Yeah,
but I imagine that as dull,
Right.
like more dry. And, yeah.
I actually like that show, but I get what you're saying.
I haven't really watched it, but that's the way I pictured Game of Thrones is what I imagine
like
Downton
that.
Abbey as, and I'm probably wrong about that too.
Yeah, you might be a little bit, but I understand what you're saying. So about the White Walkers and the whites. Well, for one thing, the whites, aka the zombies, are a bit scarier early on because we don't know that much about them, and just a few seem scary. Whereas like later we see the Magnificent Seven fighting off a horde of them, which was awesome. But
Right.
they're not quite. It's not quite the horror movie feel.
And there things that were scary about them. The eyes, they're kind of cloaked in shadow a lot in this beginning. They're not wearing armor or any type of insulation up in the cold, so that's scary in itself, that they're sort of unnatural and it's unnerving. What do you got?
And the girl, she just looks like a horror movie character. She's got a little bit of malice.
Oh
in
yeah,
her
the
face.
whites themselves, right? Yeah, I was referring to the White Walker. But yeah,
the
totally.
white.
Yeah,
she's just creepy. And then also the creepiest thing is all those dead bodies arranged in this pattern, which
right.
look
And that's
like
important too.
that's cult like. But yes, that. Going forward, we see similar patterns in the cave drawings that Jon Snow showed Dany in season 7, spirals and circles and
we
things.
see that symbol as well. Too.
Yeah, but a couple seasons after this, when Jon's with the wildlings, he's with Tormund and Ygritte and Mance Rayder. They find these horses arranged in a spiral, and then I think in season 5 there's ice spike circles around the mantle where the Night King is. We first see the Night King, and he's turning one of Craster's kids.
That was amazing. That whole place was so cool looking.
That was so cool. And then in the door, when the three-eyed raven's showing Bran how the White Walkers were created, we see a spiral of stone around the weirwood tree. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think the children, we think maybe the children of the forest, these symbols are important to them, and they're using that in their ritual to turn this guy into the first White Walker. So the patterns maybe originated with the children of the forest, but lived on through their creations, the White Walkers.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
But we still don't really know exactly the nature of them or what they're about. It seems like a magical thing to me, but it could be just a ritual or a tradition or something. Yeah,
I wonder. I noticed when you said weirwood a minute ago, you kind of said weirwood. You know why that's called that?
I don't.
Apparently, it was a nod to Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead.
Oh,
by George R.R. Martin. And they say werewood on the TV show, so when you said weirwood, it kind
I
of
was
triggered
just saying it like it was
that memory in
spelled.
my brain.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
And then last, just about the White Walker stuff. So what are the Night's Watchmen doing? They're like scouting for wildlings, right?
They're ranging. Yeah, they're scouting for wildlings, just getting a feel for the vibe of what's going on, I imagine. It's a frequent thing they do. They range. They're just, keep a watch on the area, make sure that there's no encroaching forces, stuff like that.
And then, as you said, we do see a White Walker, and it's interesting that they're already pretty close to the wall in season 1 here. But I'm imagining what they're doing is they're just biding their time, and they're trying to increase their army. Anytime they can encounter a living thing, they'll kill it and add it to their forces, right?
For the most part. But interestingly, here and at the season 2 finale, we see 2 occasions where they let a human live. So they let Will live, right? Throws him, tosses him the head.
We didn't see how he got away, but yeah, you assume that the White Walker could have probably killed him if he wanted to.
Oh, yeah. No, he was definitely left alive for a reason, to send the message that the White Walkers are back, baby. So what's their motivation for that? Why? Why are they telegraphing this? Is it so that the Night's Watch will begin ranging more frequently, that they'll encounter the dead, that they'll eventually send the dragon? Are they intentionally starting the chain reaction to get a dragon to come up their way in the future?
I mean, I don't necessarily think we can assume that the White Walker let him live, because we've seen other people get away from them, but it could be.
I think that he let him live because at the end of season 2, the White Walker intentionally lets Sam live.
Okay. And you know what? Another reason why I think that he may have let him live is, why you might think that he let him live is that he threw that head out, and that's sort of like, we're fucking dangerous.
Yeah, that's a message. Like he could have just approached him.
Right.
Like, that gesture meant something, I feel like. Like, yeah, it's crazy though. Why did he let him live? I want to know. Now we sort of know that the Night King is connected with Bran in these visions. Could he have foreseen everything and just playing his part? It
could be just as simple as because somebody needed to go back and get their head chopped off by Ned and talk about the White Walkers and stuff like that.
Could be.
They needed it for the story.
Or maybe just the more people they can attract, the more undead they can gain for their army.
Yeah, I think if you had to have a story reason, that would be it. That would make the most sense to me.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's not smart to let your enemy know about you. You should just build your forces in secret.
Keep your tactical advantage. Yeah, absolutely. Is that it for your number 3?
Yep.
All right. My number 3 is Bran and climbing. That was another thing when I first started watching this series that sort of caught my attention, that they had somebody climbing around a castle. And I've always thought castles were really cool, and I've always liked exploring and climbing on things and stuff like that. So I felt like they were tapping into part of my soul with Bran climbing in this and exploring the castle and getting this unique vantage point of everything. And it just really tapped into my spirit of adventure. And I just really loved the music playing, and he's the first to see the king and the queen arriving, and he's obviously really talented at climbing. Like some of the
those shots are really cool too when he's walking along the spine of the rooftop.
Yeah, and I'm just imagining it, wanting to do it. So having stepped into the series not thinking that I would be interested at all, it was something that stuck out to me as well. That they're just capturing this sort of whimsical adventure vibe that that I could relate to, and it was
until
surprising.
They kill him almost.
Yeah, exactly. And that was something that I loved also about the episode,
because they really tease you and play with you. Like Jamie sort of seems a little bit like, we can't kill this guy, and how old are you? And Bye-bye.
Yeah, and there's foreshadowing with Catelyn, which is another part that relates to my number one, establishing her character is she's very protective over her children. She's like, listen, Bran, like, you gotta fucking stop climbing, you little bitch.
But she kind of laughs when she realizes he's lying too. I think she's, I feel like that as a father sometimes when I'm telling Nico, you can't do this, and he fights back. I'm like, he's a fighter. That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got some
like
life in him.
Cersei with Joffrey, like, it's not good the stuff that he does, but he had will and drive, and that was what she did not like about Tommen.
Yeah,
he was a pushover.
He can be pushed around.
So obviously, Bran is going to be his own person, which is good as a parent to experience.
You don't want to completely crush that impulse out of your kid.
Right. So she's got mixed emotions, but that's foreshadowing Bran falling, obviously. But it's also establishing Catelyn as being a fiercely protective mother, which was cool that Jaime mentioned that in season 6, I believe, when he's meeting with Edmure Tully, who's a prisoner, and he's comparing Cersei to Catelyn, saying that they're both fiercely protective of their children, and that he admired that about Catelyn. I felt like that was portrayed in this episode, at least with that scene to start. So right off the bat, we're learning these deep traits for these characters consistently. But yeah, that I just love the climbing, and that whole thing just really hit me. So that's my number 3, just the novelty, and
I love that too.
That was something that drove me, like brought me into this series and made me care.
And later when Bran comes, he's not dead, and I was like, oh good, I hope we get to see more of those climbing sequences. And then when it's clear that he's gonna be
he's paralyzed,
crippled, his legs. I was like, oh man, oh well.
Yeah.
At least he's alive. Yep. I still always like his character. Yeah,
definitely. And it just stuck out to me, like remembering what brought me into made me care about the series in the first place. That was just, important to me to mention. So number 2, what you got, bro?
Well, I mentioned it before, but just the cruelty of this show, and it seems weird to say, but I like dark, edgy shows, and this is one of the edgiest. And it was, there was a few things in this episode. Right off the bat, the White Walker beheads one of the Night Watchmen, Sir Waymar. Right. It's like, oh fuck! And then we see grim. Ned, the hero, beheading a guy. That's
whoa, grim.
Pretty intense. Yeah, that's grim. And then Jaime pushing Bran out the window. And also something I'd forgotten is Drogo raped Dany.
Right.
Yeah. And that's something that where I feel like the showrunners kind of fucked up, because I'll bring another thing from the book. From what I understand, that did not happen in the book. I think I read it back then.
It's a little bit less rapey the way it's portrayed in the book, for sure. Like it's more willing.
Yeah, well, that's important.
She ceremonially, more willing. Like she didn't necessarily scream and try to prevent it in this case, but she wasn't resisting too hard. Like she was kind of playing the part. Still felt rapey, but it's much less so in the books.
Yeah, in this one it was like she was not into it at all. It just and
in the books,
fucking pushes her down and ugh.
Yeah, she's ceremoniously removing the bells from his hair, and they're preparing for it, and it seems much more consensual for sure.
And that's such a touchy subject. This series has had a lot of rape early on, well into it, and I think George R. R. Martin said, well, that's kind of what women had to deal with back then, and we're in the period that this kind of models itself after, and so we're portraying the reality of it. But I do feel like it got gratuitous, but it's another example of how the show is just really harsh and cruel.
Agreed. Yeah, very, very cruel. And that it's interesting that you and I both like that aspect of it, that we're drawn to the darkness.
I think anyone who watches this show likes that, whether they know it or not. And some people are like, "Fuck you, dude, you're bullshit." But well, then why'd you keep watching? Why don't you go watch the Garden Channel or something?
Right. I was just going to draw a parallel between us and Bran. Who after he's paralyzed and old Nan's offering to tell him about all these fabled knights and princes, and he's like, I don't care about that. And he's like, oh, she's like, oh, you want to hear the dark stories? About the winter that lasts for a lifetime and children born and die all in darkness. You like that kind of story, don't you, Bran? And he's like, yeah. And that's us. That's the audience for this show.
But I mean, I actually really like that the series has come around now and letting good things happen to the characters, because you can only take so much. I want variation in the storytelling, and I want good people to win sometimes.
We know, we've seen them go through so much that these characters do deserve something good
and
to happen.
It feels so good to see them. Yeah, good things happen for like Jon Snow.
You can get a little bit of payoff before a brutal, heartbreaking season 8 that ends on a bittersweet
with everyone dead and the White Walkers ruling all of Westeros. And then the spin-off will be White Walkers go to Essos.
Right, yeah. Suicide rates have skyrocketed this year after the series finale of Game of Thrones.
Winter has come.
George R.R. Martin is laughing in his ranch in New Mexico.
Did you see it yet?
No, I have not. I never saw the original one either.
Well, it doesn't matter, but this is a good one. I think you'll like it.
Nice. I'm definitely not afraid of clowns like other people are, so I will be willing to watch this movie. And yeah, it looks fun. You're all. That's it for your number 2?
Yep.
All right, my number 2 was seeing Robert and Ned, which I was just thinking, man, I miss these guys. Knowing where we are now in the story, with the Great War beginning and the Night King having a dragon, and trying to marshal the forces of humanity against the forces of undead and darkness. I'm just thinking, watching this episode, like, how would it be different if Ned and Robert were still alive? They were such a powerful military duo back in the day. Like, it would be such an asset to have these wizened, older, characters to play a role in this fight that's coming. But that's what makes it so fun. Also, is that the mentors are gone. Our characters are freewheeling, trying to learn on the fly.
It's like Star Wars a little bit with Yoda and
the hero's
Ben Kenobi.
Journey. And the mentor. Look up where that word comes from. And it's, relates to exactly that. It's just so cool. It's like seeing these guys that I love. King Robert, such a funny character, man. And Mark Addy that plays him, I think is just great casting. And everybody loves Ned for the most part, So,
some people don't? I mean, they probably think he's just too stupid, right?
Yeah. People criticize him for being too noble, and
could see that. John's the same way.
Yeah, definitely. Which he said outright in the last episode to air. The finale. Say I'm like Ned. Say I'm like my father. That it's got him killed.
Fine. I don't care.
Which is cool. So it's just especially after hearing Ned brought up so much in the season finale, and his ghost has been so present with the reawakening of the Theon character, who realizes that Ned is still a part of him, and that he's a Stark as well as a Greyjoy, and with Jon standing up for Ned in the last episode, and following in his footsteps, telling the truth, and just being an honorable person. It makes it mean even more to see Ned now, knowing what an influence his character had on these characters that we're still experiencing now. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I was just thinking, this is the perfect time. I'm loving this conversation, and this is the perfect time to do this, to go back.
The rewatch.
If you'd waited until after season 8, it would have been fine. But right now, it's just, we're still looking forward to more of the series, but we have most of it behind us to reflect on. So I think it's
right.
Great.
This is the perfect time. That's what I was thinking too. That's why I suggested it. I was like, oh man, if ever we're going to do a rewatch, right now is the perfect time. Yeah. The number of weeks that we have until the the next season lines up pretty well. Like, just the fact that so much hype is going to build before the next season. Like, right now is when people are going to be doing their rewatches and getting into it and refreshing themselves for the final season. It's a perfect time to do it. But yeah, like all these Ned and Robert moments, going down into the crypt, seeing Lyanna's statue, seeing Robert place the feather that we see later on when Littlefinger and Sansa are down in the crypt and she picks up the feather.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, so cool, man. All these little nods that they've done. Just the idea that the Baratheon and Stark houses would be joined. You know, Ned and Robert are talking, and he says, you know, we were supposed to rule together, Ned. If Lyanna had lived, we'd be bound by blood. You know, but it's not too late. I have a son, you have a daughter. We can still join our houses. And let's go. And they like walk out of the crypt. But that makes me think of, you know, they still each have a son and a daughter. If you think about it, you know, Gendry is Robert's son. Ned has Arya, who knows Gendry, coincidentally. I think that these houses may end up being joined.
I could see that. Yeah.
Gendry would be legitimized by Jon in honor of the relationship that their parents had.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Jon will restore this great house that's been lost to the annals of time. All the Baratheons are dead at this point, except for Gendry.
So that will happen before the final episode when they all die.
yeah, hopefully.
Just before. Okay.
Before those houses are extinguished again. It'd be great. I wouldn't even really be mad if that happened. It'd be so ballsy. You know, that I'd respect it.
It would be pretty crazy.
It would be crazy. Just sadistic enough for George R. R. Martin.
George is like, because George Martin said, well, it's going to be a bittersweet ending if you've watched this show. And then everybody dies and we're like, you said it would be bittersweet. And he's all, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
That's just kind of bitter, George.
Yeah, just bitter, man. It's just, you forgot the sweet, dude. Yeah, I thought seeing like the joking, like japing, you know, semi-antagonistic relationship that between, but playful, between Jon and Robert and Ned. You know, you've got fat, and like the way that they criticize each other but just laugh about it, and it's, you know, like the way brothers do, or good friends, you know, breaking each other's balls type thing. Mm-hmm. It was cool seeing this and them doing it here because it reminded me of Jon meeting Gendry. You know, mm-hmm. And like, and the same type of thing where it's like you're slimmer than your father, referencing how he got fat, you know, and then Gendry saying that
you're shorter.
He's shorter than Ned, and him taking it as a criticism. At least it looks like that at first. There's a moment where you don't know how he's going to react, but then he starts laughing, and it's the same way that the tension is destroyed. That's right, you know, at this moment in this show. So cool. I love these throwbacks and similar vibes and feels and
reflections and echoes and things.
Yeah, it's just great, man. Like they're doing a really, really good job with being true to this series, I think, and giving us these echoes and these moments to harken back to the old days, and so many of them. It's just like an added bonus, some layer of depth that I think is really. I really appreciate that element of this, like the later episodes for sure. Mm-hmm. But so that's my number 2, Robert and Ned. Love these guys. Great to see them again.
Okay, my number 1, I've been trying to, so I was thinking, you know, about differences between the show from the beginning to now, and trying to see if the quality has changed much. I already talked about the dialogue, which I think is pretty similar. The pacing, now I've noticed it only took King Robert half an episode to get to King's Landing, and Cersei says we've been writing for a month, but they just zip right to it. And I'm like, oh, maybe, you know, people's complaints about the pacing of season 7 are a bit misplaced because they were already doing stuff like that in the very first episode. But then again, it's the end of the episode and they're still there, whereas now they probably would have been to like 2 or 3 other places within the episode. I think that's partially reflecting, though, like the lack of source material, that they don't have as much information about the journeys, so they're not showing the journeys as much. But yeah, it didn't I mean, there's whatever the reason is. Yeah. Like they've established that it takes time. They just don't show a lot of the stuff. They'll show us all the important beats and skip the travel. It just feels, you know, faster paced now. But I just thought it was interesting that because a lot of that is about the travel, and even in this episode, they don't bother showing that travel because it wouldn't be interesting to watch it. So yeah, we do see more of the travel heading south though on the King's Road, which is interesting. Like there are points in the series where they do dwell on travel. That stuff. Yeah, yeah, they do. I'll be watching that. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And then just one other thing is, of course, everybody looks younger, and especially the kids, because they look like kids, and Bran, it says he's 10 and Sansa says she's only 13, and now she would be like 20 or something, or 19.
Yep. Yeah, something like that.
But I thought Jaime, especially of the adults, looked a lot younger.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. Now you can see like a band of like whitish hair coming around in his head,
and he has longer hair back
episodes.
then, and just seems like a rapscallion. More now, he seems a little bit like a grizzled veteran.
Yeah, I like the longer hair look on Jaime. I think it works well with that character. And it's more like it references the books more because he's got the golden locks, like the Lannister traits.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Tyrion's kind of blonde here too.
More than now, huh? Another thing about he used to dye his hair, but another thing about Jaime is that during the right before he pushed Bran out, with all what we've seen of him since then, where we've come to know him and like him more and see that he's got noble characteristics, and that his big flaw is that he's just so tied up in his sister, who's more fucked up than he is, that you can see that Cersei's really the one who's like, he saw us, and you can't. Exactly. Yeah, she's the one who goaded him into doing it, and he does it, and he says the things you do for love, which is exactly why he's doing it, because he loves his sister. Otherwise, he would not have done that. I'm trying to make excuses for him because I like him now. It was still a horrible thing, but you see it in a different light now. That's all.
Knowing the context more, exactly, like we know that he saved King's Landing, we know that he has honor, that he's swept up with his sister, like you're saying. Like I got the same vibe rewatching it now, and for the first time noticing that,
because when you first really watch it, it's like that guy is fucked. That's all you think.
But now rewatching, it's like he saw us. Did you hear me? He saw us. So hint, kill him.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. So that's all for my number.
Even he's struggling with it, asking him his age, like he's struggling to deal with it. He can't even look at him when he does it. He's looking at Cersei for that strength to do it.
Right.
The things that I do for love.
Devil's advocate, it wasn't that hard.
No, it wasn't that hard. Then again, he's trying to play it off, I think.
Maybe, yeah.
As part of his character is always being cool and collected.
Yeah.
But yeah, great point. So my number one, don't even have to change topics. It's Bran's fall, which, as we talked about, was a total shocker for me the first time watching this. Like if I hadn't liked the show enough already, which I had within 30 seconds, like everything about the show I loved, just the fact that they did this at the end drew me even more in. I was like, wow, this show is they're playing for keeps, like this is serious.
It's like for me, it's like
shocking.
No, god damn it, and then I gotta watch and see what happens next time now for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, me too. I loved Bran the character, and I was horrified and just drawn in even more by that.
Absolutely.
That it made me feel like that. It was just like something that the show has done so powerfully. It evokes emotions and feelings, and that was the first time that really, like, something really hit me on this show, was that moment, and that strength. It's just, I knew that the show had power at that point. And like we were saying, it's an interesting moment for Jaime. First of all, there's a few shocking things that happened in that moment. The Bran's fall was a shocker. The revelation of the incest was a shocker. I've been pointing out that they've been mentioning repeatedly throughout the episode that they're a brother and sister, with Jaime first appears, as your brother, and then Arya pointing out.
It was very clear.
Jaime, we know they're brother and sister at this point. And so that was what they, one thing they fixed from the first pilot. So it's really like impactful moment when we see that them having sex here. We're like, what the fuck is going on? Like,
and they don't reveal it's her for a minute. Crazy. So you're just like, oh yeah, another sex scene. But then, what?
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of hiding. She's bent over and you can't see her. It's sort of mirroring the Dany scene, interestingly.
And also the Dothraki quote celebration.
The wedding, It's a dull affair unless 3 people are killed at a Dothraki wedding. For sure. At that moment, I have like a few things written down about that too. Like, that was crazy. And then when Jorah tells Dany, there is no word in Dothraki for thank you. I was like, I just wrote down hardcore. Like, that's fucking hardcore, man. That's what I like about this show is elements that are just so hardcore. Like it goes really hard in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the incest was shocking, and then that moment, quite the little climber, aren't you? How old are you, boy? 10? 10. Then he turns back to Cersei. The things I do for love, and pushes him out are just like, oh my God. Like, it makes you feel for him, for Bran, even more the fact that they just pointed out that he's 10 years old. Like, he's snuffing out an existence that's taken 10 years to develop, and he's skilled, and he's, at least at climbing, not so much at archery. But, he's his own person. He's got a relationship with his dog, and he's growing and becoming really good at stuff, and it's just so tragic that they point out his age. I feel like right before they killed him, rubbed it in even more. What Jaime did at that moment, just horrible. That definitely hooked me for sure. I mean, I was already hooked, like I said, but there's no way I was going to stop watching after that finale. After that, that finale of that moment, this episode.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's important, like we mentioned also, that they did that this episode because otherwise everybody would have stopped watching after Ned.
Yeah. Yeah.
After Baelor.
It still shocked me. I mean, I was like, okay, how's he going to get out of this? And then
who, Ned?
Yeah, and then
oh yeah, me too. Absolutely.
He didn't, and I was
that's
like,
the moment when you realized that they were like that first episode with Bran. That was just the foreshadowing, bracing us for this. Like, yeah, even after Bran's fall, he lived. So
yeah,
so there was we weren't like fully enveloped in how hardcore the show gets. It's Ned's death that tells us that you better watch your fucking back. Like, don't get too attached to anybody, bro.
Yeah. And then there's the Red Wedding, cool. Which is a whole nother level of...
whole nother level. Like, oh, you thought it was bad killing a 10-year-old? Let's stab a fetus repeatedly. Right. Oh, my God, dude. Oh, man. What do you got? Anything else for notes you want to mention?
Yeah, a couple. I just wondered if you had an idea what got the mama direwolf killed.
Oh, the direwolf was killed fighting that stag.
Okay, because they pulled out some...
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So glad you mentioned that, because this is really important. The direwolf had the stag's antler sticking out of it, and Ned bends over and says, "Tough old girl," and pulls out the stag's antler. And it's foreshadowing the relationship between direwolf and stag, leading to the deaths of direwolf and stag. So for anybody who hasn't already picked this up, Ned is the direwolf, Robert is the stag.
Oh,
their
Robert's
interaction
the stag,
and coming together foreshadows both of their deaths this same season.
Right.
Which is like our first little bit of epic foreshadowing.
Not all that subtle, but I still like it.
Oh yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's on the nose. I mean, especially once you learn the house sigils, it's not apparent at first,
right?
Because
of course
you don't know immediately.
But then someone does say, "Yeah, the wolf is the sigil in that scene."
The direwolf is the sigil.
But then you don't. Yeah.
It's John who says that.
And then I liked when Viserys noted that Khal Drogo has never been defeated in combat, because on the Facebook group the other day, we were talking about who would you choose for your fighter if you had a trial by combat, and there were a few choices.
Ooh.
And really what it came down to for me was, would I pick the Mountain or would I pick Khal Drogo? And I think I might pick Khal Drogo because we've seen the Mountain be all but defeated in his fight with Oberyn. I mean, if Oberyn just hadn't been so cocky, he would have defeated the Mountain.
Right.
But we never saw Khal Drogo get defeated in a straight up fight.
But then again, the only reason that the Viper came that close was because of his chosen weapons and tactics. He was using something with very long reach, so he could tickle the Mountain from a distance and stay away from his sword range.
Uh-huh.
With Drogo,
he's got that scythe or whatever.
Arak, the Arak, and he would be fully within the Mountain's striking range, which is extremely dangerous.
Right.
Although he is also very large himself. So, it's a great
All right,
question.
I pick Clint
really
Eastwood
good question.
as
You're lucky, punk.
as my fighter.
I'll pick Darth Vader.
Clint Eastwood versus
awesome.
Darth Vader.
I'd never even considered the possibility of nominating Khal Drogo under the circumstance of a trial by combat. So you just kind of blew my mind by suggesting that, which is so cool. It's awesome.
So that's all I got.
For your notes?
Yeah.
Oh man, I've got just how true to the series this episode is really cool. There's only one thing that's really any different from the books at all, which is not, I wouldn't even consider it a spoiler. It's just that Catelyn is being discouraging of Ned to go down south, whereas in the books she's encouraging him to head south.
That's intriguing. I want to know why, but I don't want you to tell me right now.
Right. So many cool things. Just seeing ice for the first time again stopped me dead in my tracks, because that was one of the other things that I thought was amazing about the series at first, was just how huge this fucking sword was. When we first see it, it just made a huge impact for me just watching it, because I love blades. I don't know, I'm weird.
Oh, that's cool.
I liked seeing him cleaning ice in the Godswood again, and having Catelyn show up to give him the news of Jon Arryn's death. The sense of mystery that this episode imparts with the White Walkers from the north, and the not really knowing what's going on, and having nobody believe the deserter, and then had the sudden appearance of direwolves south of the wall again, sort of adds this sense of intrigue and mystery, like there's something going on. Yeah,
and this sets up the two kind of parallel storylines of this series. There's the political intrigue and the Machiavellian plot lines about the throne, getting the throne, and there's the arrival of the White Walkers.
Yeah, both very present in this episode. That sense of mystery and intrigue just had me just drooling, wondering what was going on. I liked Illyrio Mopatis whispering in Viserys' ear, "They drink secret toasts to your health. They cry out for their true king," talking about the people of Westeros, and how Dany recently had recognized or had mentioned that, telling Varys, like, listen, I didn't fall for that bullshit when Illyrio was telling that to my brother, so don't be pulling that shit on me. And I was watching it this time, you could see her watching Illyrio talk to Viserys and tell him all this, and so you could see her processing it and realizing, or at least putting it to memory, so she could either realize in the future that it was bullshit, or potentially realizing now that it was bullshit.
Yeah. So
that was cool. I thought it was interesting, Benjen coming to Ned and talking about the deserter, and Ned saying, like, could you believe it? He mentioned the White Walkers, claimed that he saw that the White Walkers killed his friends. And Benjen's like, well, the two other guys haven't come back yet. They're still missing. So Benjen, right off the bat, is not discounting the possibility of White Walkers, which kind of, I think Ned's sort of taken aback by that. He certainly becomes more thoughtful of it, but he's being taken down to the south.
Yep,
so
away from it.
Not something that he can focus on. But it's interesting that the position of the Night's Watch is not so solid on the fact that the White Walkers are no longer in existence. Another cool thing was when Jaime and Ned square off, and Jaime's being very aggressive towards Ned, and it's sort of the reversal of what happened previously. We know that when Robert took the throne, that Tywin took the city, and the first person to get into the throne room afterwards was Ned Stark, who walked in with his soldiers and saw Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne. And Jaime got down from the throne and said, I was just keeping it warm for you, Lord Stark, and submitted to Lord Stark. All he had to do was sit, and not give up that spot, and he could have theoretically been king, because it wasn't known who was going to be king at the time. Just that they were getting rid of the Targaryens, essentially. We had Lannisters working with Baratheons, working with Starks, and it was Robert who emerged as the leader.
And when Robert's saying to Ned, I need you to run this kingdom so I can drink and eat and whore, I was like,
myself to an early grave.
Yeah, and that's this show sort of signifying, falsely, but if you are used to traditional narratives, it's like, okay, Ned's the hero and he's going to overcome a lot of challenges to become the king. And,
Yeah.
and that also
so everybody watching
pairing
was
with
expecting that.
Yeah, HBO advertisements showing Ned sitting in the throne with,
with the
you
sword.
win or you die, and it's like, oh, he died.
Yeah, and they're it's great advertising too. They're making you think that he's going to win.
Yeah,
when in fact they're setting you up for his death.
right.
That's great, genius.
Totally.
So funny, man. So yeah, I loved seeing that whole thing with Jamie and Ned talking there, and Jamie is goading him and like saying, well, why didn't you ever do tournaments, huh? And he's like, Ned responds, well, I don't fight in tournaments because when I fight a man for real, I don't want him to know what I can do. And that kind of shuts Jamie up. It's like, touche. And he's like, even says like, oh, well said, Lord Stark, But I thought that was really cool because like we've talked about with the White Walkers, you don't want to give away your tactical advantage. And Ned is smart. By not fighting in tournaments and melees like all these other guys, he's keeping his skills under wrap, which gives him a tactical advantage because dudes won't even know what style moves he'll be throwing, which is awesome. But he'll have all the information on all the other fighters. So really smart.
Or you could like be in a tournament and only do half your moves.
Yeah, but we saw how well that worked out for Conor McGregor.
Which one?
He's a UFC guy.
Oh.
A UFC champion who decided to throw himself into the boxing ring recently with Floyd Mayweather, which limited his skill set to boxing tactics, and he ended up losing. Yeah. Whereas it would have like fully unleashed, he would have, totally decimated Mayweather. I'm assuming as mixed martial arts is just by definition superior to a limited skill set of boxing. It just encompasses more and. I don't think it's really debatable. Oh, there's another great moment, which I thought was really funny, which is just worth mentioning between Tyrion and the Hound. Do you remember that moment this episode?
No.
Their interaction? Yeah, it's something that flew past me when I watched it, the episode originally, and even on subsequent viewings, but it stuck out to me for some reason now. And Tyrion is sitting down, and it's the night after the banquet, and he's obviously super hungover. And he's like, oh, and the Hound sits next to him and says, rough night, imp. And Tyrion says, if I get through this without squirting from one end or the other, it'll be a miracle, which cracked me up. But then the Hound said, he's getting ready to go on the hunt, is what Tyrion is talking about. And the Hound says, never pegged you for a hunter. And Tyrion, blasé, sort of responds, best in the land, my spear never misses. Obviously referring to his forays with prostitution or prostitutes, and the Hound has a great response. It's not hunting if you pay for it. It's just a small moment that I never really picked up on before that stuck out to me for some reason now. Figured I'd mention it. That's pretty much all I got for notes.
Okay.
Yeah, just
cool.
All this good stuff, man. Love this episode.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll take a break with that, and there's more to come. So stay with us, everybody.
Woo!
So let's jump into some news about Game of Thrones. You start, Jason.
Okay. First thing from Vulture, Game of Thrones Tormund is committed to ogling Brienne on and off camera. So Tormund and Brienne are the best Game of Thrones ship for many reasons, partially because there's no incest involved. I'm not sure if that was in the article or just an added comment from...
I think this is summarizing the article.
But mostly the actors playing them are having so much fun. An interview on Late Night, Gwendolyn Christie, who plays Brienne, explained that Christopher, how do you say his last name? Hivju decided to stay in character as Tormund Giantsbane even when filming stopped, which gave him the opportunity to give her kooky stares while doing normal things like eating sandwiches and, quote, masticating wildly at me. He just seems like such a good guy from his kookiness on social media, playing with little dolls of Tormund and Brienne and stuff like that.
Having him kiss and whatnot. Yeah, he seems like an awesome guy. And a shout out to Lisa, our listener, Lisa Moreno,
who collated this news for us. Thank you.
Yeah. Great story. I'm so glad that I know that now. That even off camera, he's eyeing her up. It's hilarious. Our next article is from Nerdist, and it's about Robert Baratheon totally predicted Game of Thrones' future. The recently concluded 7th season of Game of Thrones neatly set up the series' endgame while finally delivering the long-delayed homecoming of Daenerys Targaryen. As it turns out, these events were foreshadowed all the way back in the first season by King Robert Baratheon, the man who killed Daenerys' brother Rhaegar in battle and took the crown during Robert's rebellion. Now, a supercut has compiled Robert's dire warnings and predictions alongside clips from seasons 6 and 7 where the events came to pass. Although Robert believed that Daenerys' older brother Viserys would be the primary threat to his throne, he correctly realized that Daenerys' marriage to Khal Drogo meant that the Dothraki horde would finally have a reason to cross the narrow sea into Westeros. And as Jaime Lannister discovered the hard way, it's a huge mistake to fight the Dothraki in the open field. Even without her dragons, Daenerys' forces outmatched the Lannister army. And I think Robert, or someone even says, only a fool would fight the Dothraki in open combat.
Oh, wow.
In the field. I think it was it's next episode, possibly, Robert saying that. So another thing that Robert couldn't have foreseen is that his friend Ned Stark protected Jon Snow, the true heir to the Iron Throne. But the most intriguing question is whether Robert realized that Jon's parents, Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, truly loved each other, as Lyanna's, quote, abduction by Rhaegar was one of the reasons that his rebellion was started. Robert clearly had feelings for Lyanna, and had been promised to him before the war. Was Robert's rebellion the story of a man on a personal quest of revenge against the Targaryen family for Rhaegar stealing the woman he loved? Sure feels that way.
Yes, I would say it was.
Yeah,
that kicked it off.
Yeah,
Fueled it.
There was one thing. There was also the fact that Rhaegar, or that Mad King Aerys had summoned for Ned and Robert to be sent to court, and the rebellion actually started when Jon Arryn called his banners and refused to send Ned Stark south to the king.
Right.
So that's what started the war technically, but it ended up being largely, I mean, the whole thing, the conflict started because of Rhaegar and Lyanna. So that's sort of what the history books painted as being the major cause during the war as well.
Next on AV Club, everyone gets the death they deserve on Game of Thrones. Fans of the show are quick to tell you that one of the many reasons HBO's Game of Thrones remains such an enticing watch is the fact that you never know how or when a character is going to die. Starting with the first season sudden decapitation of principal character Ned Stark, the series took a cue from George R.R. Martin's series of books and let it be known that no one, with the exception of a few characters with fairly bulletproof plot armor, is safe. But in a recent Reddit post, one fan noticed a pattern that's emerged in the many show's major deaths that could offer some insight as to how the remaining characters will eventually bite the bullet. Ned Stark used his great sword Ice to behead the Night's Watchman. He was beheaded with his own sword. Joffrey gave the command to execute Ned. He was killed in a way that took away his ability to speak. I reached pretty far for this one, I'll admit. Tywin ordered the Red Wedding, where numerous Stark men were killed by crossbow-wielding musicians. He was killed by a crossbow. Roose Bolton killed Robb Stark with a knife to the heart. He was killed by a knife to the heart. Walder Frey ordered Catelyn Stark's throat cut at the end of the Red Wedding. He had his throat cut by Arya. Ramsay Bolton was fond of feeding people to his hounds. He was fed to his own hounds. The Sand Snakes were each killed in a way that mirrored their own style. Nymeria was strangled by her own whip. Obara was impaled with her own spear, and Tyene was killed by her favorite poison. Wow, I didn't notice that. That's
wow,
pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really good.
Olenna Tyrell killed Joffrey with poison. She was executed with poison. Littlefinger betrayed Ned Stark by putting a knife to his throat, and the Valyrian cat's paw dagger was used in the attempt to have Bran Stark assassinated, which he intentionally blamed on the Lannisters, sparking the Lannister-Stark conflict. He was executed by having his throat cut by the Valyrian cat's paw dagger. Not convinced? Here's a few more from the comments section. Jon killing his Night Watch brother Corin Halfhand. He was later killed by his Night Watch brothers. Ygritte killed many people with arrows. She was killed with an arrow. Polliver killed what the fuck salami with needle through the throat. Arya killed.
What the fuck, salami?
What is that?
Lamy was his name.
Oh, okay.
His name is Lamy Greenhands,
Oh, yeah.
and there's a moment before the Hound goes to eat every fucking chicken in this room with Arya. Before they enter the building, they're kind of lurking in the woods. And it's funny. The Hound's face is perfectly visible in a hole in the trees, and Arya's face is perfectly visible. And she sees that this guy Polliver has needle, and she's like, that guy killed Lamy. He has needle. And the Hound goes, "What the fuck, salami?"
Oh, got it.
That's what that was referencing.
So, and then, Polliver was killed. Arya killed Polliver with needle. Lysa Arryn loved throwing people through the moon door. She was shoved through the moon door. This is amazing. I love this. The one true king,
So
Stannis
good.
the Manus, killed his brother by way of his female assistant. He was later killed by his brother's female assistant.
Oh, snap.
Lastly,
Manus.
Tywin gave Tyrion shit his entire life, literally making him in charge of all the sewers of Casterly Rock. Tyrion then killed him on the shitter. That's good. I feel like this is all intentional. While the original author of the post admits to reaching for a few of these connections, it's hard to argue that there's a certain amount of poetic justice being dispensed in Westeros.
And this is why George R. Martin is the best writer of all time, in my opinion.
Especially when it comes to like sick and twisted stuff like this.
Yeah. That
Karma.
combined with just the amount of stuff that he encodes into his stuff, like into his
It's
work,
incredible.
which is insane
Yeah,
to me.
it's incredible.
All right, our next article is from Polygon, and it's titled, "Here's Why Game of Thrones is Ineligible for an Emmy for the First Time in 6 Years."
What?
Those time restrictions are no joke. This year is big for genre television at the Emmys, including first-time nominees Stranger Things and Westworld. But one series is notably absent: Game of Thrones. Ever since Game of Thrones first debuted in 2011, the show has been nominated every single year. This sometimes meant the show was merely honored with nominations, while other years saw the series lavished by the voting body of Academy members, winning award after award. So, why? It all comes down to timing. Game of Thrones' 7th season premiered on July 16th, 2017. Its 6th season premiered on April 26th, 2016. In order to be considered for a 2017 Emmy nomination, shows had to have premiered between June 1st and May 31st, 2017. So even though Game of Thrones' 6th season still had episodes air within those particular dates, the Academy does not count the, quote, hanging episodes. Those final 4 episodes of the 6th season are therefore invalid. So it's basically because of a technicality in terms of the timing of the premiere of the series or the season this year that they're being
I get it.
disincluded for the 2017 Emmys.
So all the
so I guess I'll just
episodes,
have to win everything next year.
Yeah, all the episodes we saw this season count towards next year, huh?
Right, yeah. So the article continues, Game of Thrones' 7th season will therefore be eligible for a 2018 Emmy, and will probably secure more than a few nominations.
Yeah, I mean, if they were
categories.
discounted altogether, that would be one thing, but they just delayed.
Yep, yeah, exactly. That would be brutal if they were just totally disqualified. Totally unfair. Yeah, so we can at least still look forward to them sweeping the floor with all the other shows in the 2018 Emmys. And our final article is from comicbook.com, and it's that The Simpsons season premiere will feature a Game of Thrones homage. It might be a long while until Game of Thrones returns to television screens, but fans can soon feel the series' influence on an upcoming episode of The Simpsons. Executive producer Al Jean recently teased that The Simpsons' upcoming 29th season, including a Game of Thrones homage in the season premiere. According to TV Line, the scene will feature a guest voice by Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who plays Game of Thrones fan favorite Jaime Lannister, obviously. While details were scarce about the scene, Gene hinted that Coster-Waldau's character will develop, quote, a weird, surprising connection to Marge. So that'll be interesting. I wonder what is going to happen.
I know. What would be great is if they open it with like a Simpsons version of the opening Game of Thrones title sequence.
Yeah. Oh man, that would be so cool.
Going around Springfield, the nuclear plant or whatever.
Nuclear plant. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Nuclear plant, the school, and yeah, that'd be awesome. I think it's also worth mentioning too There was a news article recently that pointed out, we'd reported a number of weeks ago about the amount of screen time that characters get, and how who is technically the main character in terms of who has the most screen time. And until recently, it had been Tyrion, as we reported. But apparently, Jon Snow has now outmaneuvered Tyrion in terms of after season 7, Jon Snow now has more screen time total than Tyrion. So he's emerging as our main character.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough.
And he really is the main character of this series. Well, him and Daenerys, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
Now that everything's become clear.
All right, so let's move on to Raven's Calls.
Okay, first is Sarah Larkham, who says, such a great pilot, and it really holds up, and it's so relevant now because of the season 7 finale. It's sad to see all the Starks together. The pilot really kicked off this amazing show. You know, I did watch this pilot again a couple of seasons ago, and it was even sadder then because all the Starks were not back together on the show. Yeah, now that they're kind of back together, it's at least some of them are okay, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Tilly Creary says, I rewatched everything this past spring, and the one thing I absolutely love about this show is how everything that happens in every episode is important to something that happens later on in the show. I recently rewatched the pilot of The Walking Dead, and exactly 0 things that happened in that episode matters to what's happening in the series now. So true. Not so for Game of Thrones. Every event, every conversation relates to something happening in season 7, and it's just fantastic.
You know, there in the first episode of Walking Dead, I remember something about like the zombie apocalypse happening. I think that was relevant later on.
Yeah, that might. Yeah, I think that played.
That might have played something into it. Yeah. Subtle. It's subtle, but no, I'd have to go back and watch and see if there are other little things. But yeah, that's interesting.
Just finding Carl. He's like the only guy that's then and now.
Yeah, yeah. From that, let's see. The first episode had Morgan and Rick and Carl. Did it show the people in the camp, Shane and all them? I don't even remember if it did.
It showed Shane for sure.
Yeah. It must have showed Lori
and the flashback to Rick being shot. I think it showed Lori and everybody too.
I don't think it showed Glenn.
No, we didn't show him, but we got his voice.
Yeah, that's right. At the very end.
Asshole.
Yeah. Well, he's gone now too, huh? Dang. Anyways, William Steiner says, the things I do for love. Jamie Lannister, I remember how much I hated him back then. Now one of my favorite characters. Yep.
You and me both, brother. I love that guy now. Kristen Howell, hey Kristen, says, episode 1 kept me from watching more episodes for a long time because of the end of the episode. New mom hormones did not jive with any of it. Ooh, that is understandable.
Yeah. See, Kristen's one of those people that were like, I don't know about this show.
You could say
she loves it so much now.
Mommy daddy button.
Lara, Willie Swink said, probably tied with The Walking Dead for best pilot ever. Though with The Walking Dead, I kind of knew what I was getting into. With Game of Thrones, I thought I was watching a historical drama until a little zombie girl rose up from a slaughtered group of villagers. That's so funny.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. So yeah, I'm right with you there, Lara. Great comparison. Wendy Ott Eppers says there's red shirt guy number 1 of 2,461,892.
Becky Price says that scene with Dany and Viserys where he fills her up is the most cringeworthy scene of season 1. Probably. Ooh, yeah.
Right up there with that and probably that, because it was the first exposure we had to the full creepiness of incest and Viserys on this show.
Yeah, creepy.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against that. Rima Joe says, is there anyone more creepy than Viserys Targaryen? Ugh.
Is Ramsay creepier? I think he's worse for sure.
He's worse, but creepier.
I don't think so. Viserys is fucking creepy. You just want to punch him in the face.
Yeah, he's creepy.
And that's why later on, when Rhaegar turns out to have looked a lot like Viserys, and people are like, "Why did they make Rhaegar so ugly?" And I'm like, you know what? Those guys aren't actually ugly, but we just think of them that way because of how fucked up Viserys was and creepy. Yeah, I don't think he's a bad looking guy, but he just seems like it now.
Yeah. Watching this episode, I was like, he's actually a pretty handsome dude. After the whole Rhaegar thing, where the people were up in arms about that. That was the other thing that we forgot to mention too, is that seeing Viserys now, it's apparent after having seen Rhaegar at how much he was like just totally biting off Rhaegar's style and everything.
Right. That's so pretty funny.
All right, we got an email, and it's your turn.
This is Karen from London. 1, everyone commenting on the incest thing need to fully realize that 1/5 of the world still practices consanguineous marriage. She gives a link to an article on it. There are actually consanguineous counselors. Yeah. That's interesting. 1/5 of the world. 2, wow, yeah. I actually think regarding the reveal, the hardest thing for Jon will be coming to realize Ned has lied to him his whole life. He was an outsider who felt less with no explanation. He'll understand why, but possibly not why Ned wouldn't tell him at least.
Oh, and that's so sad.
I wonder if that'll play into it. Yeah.
His thoughts on Ned. I hope he doesn't hate him or something.
Right. I don't think so. I mean, the pace is so quick, he'll just maybe have a thought about it and it'll be done. 3, could it be possible that Jaime will not die? Will he kill Cersei, Jon, and Dany have to sacrifice themselves, and a triumvirate like Jaime, Tyrion, and Sansa have to raise the child that they have? So I guess that means raise Jon and Dany's child. Even if the enemy is vanquished and the wheel broken, people in general wouldn't want, quote, rightful heirs in power, at least for some time. This would bring all the warring factions together to rule as a regent body, perhaps a precursor to at least a parliamentary monarch type system.
Interesting. And they could be referring to Dany and Jon's child or Jaime and Cersei's child.
Oh, that's probably what it is. Yeah. Yeah, man, I wouldn't be surprised. This sounds weird to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if the ending of this is totally not what we're thinking. It's something out of left field like that.
I'm expecting the unexpected. For
yeah,
sure.
that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
4,
I hope so.
I thought the scene with the snow beginning to fall over King's Landing was stunning. This is the season 7 finale. It wouldn't have been epic, but I wouldn't have minded the episode ending with it swamped around with the wall scene. So she's saying,
swapped around with that?
Swapped around, with the wall scene.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, I could see that too.
Poignant. Yeah. I could go for that. Nice way to wrap it up. The snow starting to fall. Mm-hmm. Ooh, ominous. Mm-hmm. Especially after seeing, if it came after seeing the wall knocked down. Yeah. Then you're seeing it start to snow in King's Landing. It's like they're arriving.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That might have even been better. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. Great thought, Karen. Our next email comes from Tom V. Hey guys, my name is Tom Valon. I live in Houston, and during the storm, the only positive conversations that were happening about the season were about the season finale of Game of Thrones. It actually was the source of a lot of humor in a bad time, with jokes like, "This storm better not interfere with my plans to watch the season finale," and so on. I was lucky to only got a few inches of water in my apartment, but my family and many in my hometown an hour and a half east of here lost everything and are currently being airlifted out of their homes by emergency helicopters. So sorry to hear that, Tom. Still, my sister and I have had several long conversations where Game of Thrones lightened the mood and has us looking forward to something. It's great for indulging in the tragedy of a fictional world in order to distract yourself from the tragedies in this one. One last thing. Waiting for your podcast helped me get back into the swing of something similar to a normal routine. I gave it a listen this afternoon to brighten up my first day back to work. It was brilliant, as always. Thanks, Tom. I'm glad that the TV show has positive effects on the world, at least, if only just to brighten the spirits during dark times. But it makes me feel good that we helped do that for you as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for writing.
Yeah, man. I hope you're okay. I think he sent this a few weeks ago, or a couple. Yeah. So why don't you let us know, how everything's going with you and your family and everything. And
please,
thanks so much for writing in. And I hope that you can pick up the pieces and move on from that. It's such a tragedy, and I don't envy any of you guys out there. And I feel like you're probably going, oh man, I don't know if you are. It would be interesting to know though, whether you're like, oh, we're still suffering, and now this other storm came into Florida and kind of took the country's focus off of that. But I keep thinking about Texas and how bad that was for everybody, and I'm sure still is. It's going to take a long time to pick up all those pieces.
Yeah, I find myself thinking about all of it, man. Texas, Florida,
absolutely,
Oregon, and the fires out there, and just hope everything's calming down for people.
Yeah,
it sucks, man.
Well, thanks for writing in, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it, and hope everything's working out for you guys down there. Right, that's our show, episode 43. Thanks for listening, everybody. And a huge thanks to Lisa Moreno and Lara Willie Swink, who we forgot to mention pulled together the feedback for this episode.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to call us, you can call at 813-563-3739. That's 813-JOFFREY.
If you'd like to write in, you can email us at game@podcastica.com.
Check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/GOM podcast.
And be sure to check out our other great podcasts at podcastica.com. We just started a new show. It's called Strange Indeed. It's about Stranger Things. It's with Sean and Reem and Joe, and they have a lot of fun, and they're just putting out episode 2 right now, I think. So go check that out. You can find it at podcastica.com.
Do it. Get hyped. Rewatch before the new season drops and listen to Strange Indeed. It's going to be awesome. All right, everybody. Next up is Still Smug for Season 1, Episode 1. That will be coming in the next few days, much like Winter. And then we will be covering Season 1, Episode 2, The King's Road.
Woo!
All right, everybody. That's our show.
Thank you for listening.
Winter is coming in 6 years or so. I don't know, something like that.